Well, welcome back to the Change Physician Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Melissa Cady, joined by my co-host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro, and our returning guest, Dr. Brent Lacey of the Scope of Practice. Thanks for coming back.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, so today we wanted to focus or hone in on a little bit of time management. And Kevin, do you want to start off with the first question?
Sure, absolutely. And time management is interesting because as physicians, we're all supposedly time pressed. Like we have no time. So what would you say to that when physicians say we just don't have enough time for us to manage? What would you change the perspective there or say something else?
It's the same thing that I tell people when they say that, we don't have enough money to manage, or, or we don't have enough, emotional availability to manage. You got to manage whatever you've got. So there's only 24 hours in a day. There's only 7 days in a week. And yeah, our time is spoken for, maybe more than someone with a 9-to-5 job. But that makes it more important that we make plans to deliberately figure out what we're going to do with our time. And so I kind of think of it almost like a budget, so how much time do I have that is allocated to work? Okay. Well, how much time is allocated to sleep? How much time is allocated to eating? All right. So what time do I have left? And then how do I want to spend that time? And the more we can be intentional about things, the more likely we are to be satisfied at the end of a week that we spent our time the way that we wanted, because we actually put some deliberate time into making the plans to spend it appropriately.
So kind of building off a little bit, like if you're doing like a budget where you're kind of doing a hindsight reset, where you're saying, well, how much time am I doing sleeping? How much time I'm doing practice? How much of my time doing this? I could see one of the dangers with this is that people then may discover that all these things that they're so budgeting time for, they actually don't have enough hours in the day. If they're saying, well, I have this much time commitment for practice, I have this much time committed for sleep, I have this much time, but then at the end they're like, wait a second, now I only have 42 seconds and I forgot to put eating in here. So do you typically have people do an assessment of the hours? Like, do they actually have them charting out their time to start? Or how would you start when you're recommending someone start to manage their time?
I love the time assessment concept, and it's definitely a tactic that I use for folks. And so what I'll do is say, okay, take the next week and catalog the number of hours you spend on various activities and be specific. I'm spending this many hours at work, this many hours eating, this many hours sleeping, this many hours exercising, this many hours with family, this many hours, just one-on-one time with my spouse, this many hours at church. And, at the end of the week, go through and see, okay, well, what did I actually spend my time on? And if it's not what you want, if it's not hitting your priorities, then it's time, then where you need to make some adjustments. And where I think people mess up is starting with the concept of how much time do I have? And I think that's the wrong polarity. I think the way to start is, what's the most important thing that I want to do? And what's most important for my life? What do I care about spending my time on the most? Okay, that goes in number one. And then if I could only add one more thing this week, what's number two? And then work your way down. And so I've heard it said this way, and this is what I've kind of adopted. Don't schedule your priorities, don't prioritize your schedule your priorities. Okay, so if you show me someone's calendar and their credit card receipts, I can tell you what's important to them based on what they spend their time and their money on. And so if it's something that's really important to you, it's up to you to actually make the time to do it. And starting with that assessment and figuring out what you're currently spending time on and knowing where you need to make adjustments is a great place to start.
Yeah, and I love that, because that's a little bit of a different tweak when we're talking about time management, because when we replace that with priorities, it's a different mindset that people have. And you can just, instead of just saying, let's look at your time and let's kind of manage your schedule, it seems like, what is important to you? Let's identify that first. And for some people, I think that may be a little bit easier start, particularly if you're a busy physician and running all over the place and don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Go ahead, Kevin.
I was just going to say, so
you're running.
Yeah. So knowing that, and we know there are so many different kind of approaches and recommendations that come to time or priority management. What do you think are simply just bad advice when it comes to time management? What would you not recommend people to do?
Fail to pay attention fail to think that it's important. So and fail to think that they can do it. I think that's one of the things that sometimes people get into, is this trap that like, oh, I don't have time for that, or I don't have time to make time for figuring out where I'm going to go. And I tell people, you don't have enough time not to do it. It's the same thing that I do with budgeting for folks. People are like, oh, I don't have enough money, it's not worth budgeting. I'm like, no, that's the reason that you have to do the budget, is because you don't have enough money. You can't afford to make big mistakes. And I think that analogy applies for physicians. If you figure that, say 40% of our discretionary time is spent at work and 30% of our time is spent sleeping and eating, that's, not very much time left in the week to allocate. And so if you have precious few hours in the week, it's even more important that you take that time to figure out where you want to be spending your time. The other thing I think that people fail to do is to get down into the nitty gritty a little bit. So starting with, how much time am I spending at work? How much time am I spending, at home is a great place to start. But then how are you being efficient at work? So one of the things that I find a lot of times with folks is that they'll say, well, I'm spending, 12 to 14 hours every day at work. And I say, okay, well, let's break that down though. So how much time are you spending on the phone? How much time are you spending doing emails at work? How much time are you spending reading charts? And then going through the different activities that you're doing and saying, okay, how many of these activities could you either automate or delegate to somebody else? Are there tasks that you don't need to be doing, or that you could reasonably offload to someone else or some kind of an automated process, and thereby reclaim, X number of minutes per patient, X number of hours per week? I mean, you got to think of this in terms of an economy of scale. I mean, you save 5 minutes times 100 a week. I mean, it starts to really add up.
Yeah. And going along those lines of, I like that, automate or delegate, is this idea of people learning to, after they have an awareness and take an evaluation of how much time they're spending in all these different areas, is knowing when to say no to some of the things that really aren't in alignment with their priorities or what's important to them. And, you mentioned how you spend, you can tell by where people are spending their money and like all those things of what's really important to them. But it's interesting if you shift the money that you're spending towards maybe delegating to other people to free up your time to do those other things that you don't feel like you have time for. What do you think about just the importance of shifting what you're spending your money on to things that you probably shouldn't be doing?
So I think it depends on where, it depends a little bit on where you are in your stage of life and your stage of your career. So there's almost always a direct trade-off in our careers between time and money. So you can either pay someone to do a task that buys you time, or you can spend time doing something so that you save yourself the money from having to pay someone else to do it. And I think it changes over the course of your life. So for example, the first time that I made, when I first joined the military and I made my first cross-country move, I had the option to either move myself or have the military move me. And I had time, and I wanted to, have the military pay me, because I thought I could probably, get a lower price on moving stuff, get some of my buddies to help me move, maybe, save a few extra dollars. And that worked out. And then later I realized, I don't want to spend the time, and I don't want to, hurt myself lifting a bunch of heavy boxes and then be, down for 3 months and not be able to work, so it made more sense to have somebody else do it. And I think it's the same. I think it's the same in our career. So, when you're first starting out in your practice, you're the chief everything officer, and you kind of got to do a lot of stuff. And as you start making some money and you have the ability to actually hire stuff out or to pay someone else to do it, then you can and you should. And one of the things that when I'm doing my one-on-one coaching with folks for, maximizing business efficiency, is I try to help them focus on trying to find ways to maximize their time spent on activities that either only they can do, or that directly make money, or that are designed to grow the business in a way that will cause the business to become more efficient or more profitable or more safe over time. And so if there's some, so I'll give you an example of a task. So phone messages. Okay. So I can have a staff member bring me a message one of two different ways. Okay. One message says, please call this patient back. She has questions. Here's a phone number. Okay. So then I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes looking through the patient's chart and figuring out what's going on and what their history is and what are the medications they're on. And that's 10 minutes of my time. But if instead I train my staff to say, okay, bring me everything that I need to know so that by the end of your, task that you've given me, I can answer this in a yes or no question format or a very, very simple format. And so it's Mrs. Jones called, she needs a refill or she needs to switch her prescription because the one that you wrote is not covered by her insurance and she can't afford it. So can you please go for the generic instead of the brand name? Okay, I can knock that out in 12 seconds, right? And right there, I just saved myself 9 minutes and change. And so if I can train my staff to do little things like that, that scales very, very quickly.
Yeah. So you're going from chief everything officer to chief efficiency officer.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and I think this is one of the things that as physicians, this is something that I'm really passionate about is the importance of physician leadership. And this is where you go from being a physician, that you're basically just rounding at the hospital and you're doing your own thing, and you're just it's you against the world, right? And if you are owning a business or if you're leading a team, the more that you can help your team achieve the goals of the mission, the more you can spend time focusing on the things that only you can do. And over time, it's good to offload some of those tasks to people, and then later on start to hire people to fill some roles that that maybe would increase your efficiency even further.
Yeah.
I like where this discussion is going, because we started on this topic of time management, but really is becoming more of a life management discussion, and you started with the beginning of what are your priorities? Let's identify those first. Once you know where the priorities are, we all have the same 24 hours, 7 days a week, and everybody has. So now we can make time for those priorities. And then it becomes, well, how then are you optimizing your time and efficiency? So now in your practice, you're identifying where is it that you are mission critical, where that no one else can do what you're doing, or as I love how you said, you're basically identifying the high value activities that you want to be directly involved with. And then on those other, which are often enough, these situations where we're investing so much time and effort and energy, which are not mission critical, how then can we shift our focus to identify ways to make those more effective and efficient at the same time? So I love how we've sort of ran through this. What are some, kind of building onto this then, what are some first steps? Because what you're asking is almost a mind shift of a physician, from being I just walk in the door and do what people tell me, to actually returning to a role where to see themselves as a business entity. And that could be a little bit uncomfortable for people, if we weren't taught that anyway. So what would if you were going to recommend to a physician, maybe either new practice or even an established practice, but has been kind of frustrated with the efficiencies built around them and is unsure how to take ownership, what would you say to them?
So one of the things that I think is valuable is there's a concept that I like to teach. I call it, get your employees to act like owners. So the more that everybody in the business has ownership stake in how well the business does, the more likely they are to do well. And that this happens on several fronts. So in the first place, it starts with the physician or whoever is leading the organization being a strong leader. So because the attitudes of the employees tend to reflect the leadership, structure of the organization. And so if you're motivated, gung-ho, and you're all about serving the patients and all about trying to make it a wonderful environment to work, then people will pick up on that and they're going to enjoy that. The second thing I think that's really important is really excellent hiring and firing practices. And this is an area where I think physicians don't naturally excel. Frankly, I don't think anybody naturally excels at this, but unfortunately we've got a special handicap because we are not taught any of this stuff in medical school. And then at the end of residency plus 1 day, suddenly you're thrust into a position of leadership and potentially small business ownership stake, and you don't know how to run a business. And so that's one of the reasons why I started the Scope of Practice, was to try to help teach people what does it take to run a business. And so when you're hiring and when you're hiring people, it's very important to find the right kinds of people. You want people that are motivated, that are self-starters, that are always looking to make things 5% better, 10% better, a little bit more efficient, a little bit safer, a little bit better service for the patients. And it's just as important to get rid of the people that aren't meeting those benchmarks consistently. So if you have someone that, they don't have a great attitude, or, the hardest people is there's a great book, if you've never read it, that I highly recommend to folks, called The Ideal Team Player by a guy named Pat Lencioni. And he identifies the three characteristics of what makes up the ideal team player. And they're humble. The second is hungry. And what he means is they're motivated. They're hungry for doing more, for a little bit better, a little bit faster. And then they have high emotional levels of intelligence. So high EQ, if you will. So they're good at just interpersonal relationships. And so the person there's a person he likes to call the lovable slacker. And it's the person who they do just enough not to get fired, right? They're doing okay. They're nice people. They've got a good attitude, but they're not bringing it every day. They're not trying to ring that bell, right? They're just kind of going for average. It's not high five, it's medium five, right?
That's awesome.
But that's a good kind of thing to think about, because people will typically identify, quote unquote, the challenges, right? The person who is more difficult to work with, that maybe you have some conflicts with, but really is taking a step back and becoming aware of how the individual is impacting the process. Because there could be someone who is challenging to work with, may not be your favorite person, but may be really, really good at what they do. And in such case, now they're bringing a high value to the practice. And there may be somebody else, I loved how you described it as the lovable slacker. You're like, who you may preferentially want to keep if things are getting tight. But when you look really at the whole data picture here, they may not be supporting the group as much as maybe the more difficult person. So really looking at outcomes in an objective fashion, rather than just, do I like this person or not?
Oh, I love this. Yes, this is so important. And the thing that you just hit on, so these are the people that in medical school, I don't know about your guys' med schools, we called them gunners in my med school. It's the people that are, they're super smart. They're all-stars. They're getting great grades, but their attitude is, I'm willing to step over and club anybody I need to in order to achieve my own ends. And we see those kinds of attitudes that, are somewhat pervasive in certain organizations, where it's all about the dollars, or it's all about the numbers. And they don't want to help other people. They don't want to spend time on anything that doesn't directly benefit them. I will tell you that kind of attitude has no place in my own organization. We do not keep those people around, and so, if occasionally one of those people sneaks in the door and we didn't catch it during the hiring process, that's a matter of a conversation, a series of conversations with leadership, and say, hey, listen, we maybe didn't do a great job explaining how our culture is here. Okay. This is not, an all or nothing thing. You're not here to be an all-star by yourself. Okay. This isn't basketball where one guy can carry the team. This is baseball. Okay. No team has 9 players that are all the best player at their position in the entire league. But if you have a team that is unified and is good and is all working together, you can be the best team in baseball. And so that's what we're all about, is bringing the team together. And so the kinds of people that are, they're driving up the numbers, they're bringing great, revenue, they're seeing tons of patients, they're but they've got a bad attitude. Those are some of the harder people to let go. And it just depends on what you want your organization to be. And if you want your organization to be, supremely productive and, supremely profitable, and that's all you care about, then that's fine. It tends to breed toxicity in the work environment. And I personally would rather have a good place to work, even if it meant not making as much money.
Well, and that's sort of the difference between mission-driven and metric-driven. We're talking about there. So, and the first person I think of is like the malignant surgeon, who's, I guess it would be the typical. That's the stereotype. Sorry, surgeons out there, but there's the malignant surgeon, right? who comes into a hospital system and may have high volume and may have even efficient standards, but is so toxic and so difficult to work with. You have to look at all the other ripple effects, not only for the people who are working with them directly, but the indirectly, the hospital system, the hospital environment, the anesthesiologists, since obviously we need to appreciate them a lot, having to work with these people. And so I like that as well, because then again, we're focusing on mission oriented rather than just metric difference, because there is this sort of fine line, and sometimes where if you pursue too much efficiency, we start losing some of the emotionality of who you are. But yet if we don't have some efficiency, then we sort of can wallow into a space where now we are, floundering in an ineffective practice. So there's a lot of ins and outs is basically what you're saying here.
100%. And, with regard to the surgeon example that you're giving, it's true that there are really severe ripple effects. And so what you find is that if you have one person who is, highly productive, but fairly toxic, they may drive up numbers on their own, but over time the numbers will fall, because what will happen is that the people who are around them, who are good people, are going to not want to work there anymore. And people that are good have choices. I mean, that's one of the beauties of a free market environment, is that if I don't like where I'm working and I am good at what I do, I can go anywhere I want, right? So why would I stay in a place that I hate the people that I work with? Because they've just made it such a brutal environment. And so what happens is that if you don't get rid of those problem people, the good people tend to leave and the bad people are all that you're left with. And so you go from, a time when you have a single person who's a problem to now everybody's a problem because all the good people have left. And, I think as leaders, it's important for us to start, to really pay attention to our staff and to suss those things out. And if we're not tuned to that, it's very easy for those kinds of things to really creep into our organization like a cancer, and it destroys, but it destroys slowly and very thoroughly.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment off that insidious nature of toxicity from surgeons and work environments, because you talked about how sometimes companies are based off of metrics. And when you look at it, when it comes to these intangibles, you can't put a dollar sign on that impact. I think it's too, like you said, a ripple effect, that it is so pervasive and people start blaming other things. And I think that's there's a real danger there that people try to ignore because they think that the numbers are more important.
Well, and I'm going to offer what I think is a generalization. Perhaps it's overly broad, but go with me on this because I think there's some validity here. I think if you, as an organization and as a leader, if you invest in the people, the metrics will take care of themselves. Mm-hmm. Now, you've got to pay attention. It's not a free for all. It's not like you're not caring or not, noticing what's happening with the metrics. And if there is something that's not right, then, you gotta pay attention to those things. Mm-hmm. But I will tell you that what I've found is that organizations that spend more time investing in their people and making sure their people have what they need, have the equipment they need, have the support they need, have the time they need, they tend to have fewer problems. They tend to have better metrics. And then if you've got, something where someone's not hitting their metrics, usually it's an outlier case. It's, oh, well, their mom just passed away and they're just not, hitting full efficiency. Okay, well, maybe we need to give that person a break for a bit. But if we take more time investing in people than we do in caring about the numbers will fix themselves most of the time.
Amen.
And with that, also having a broad lens, I add to that, because you made me think of a couple of specific scenarios as you were saying this, right? Because Melissa and I we've done episodes on this about talking how hospitals and health systems, if they created a system where they were supporting their physician staff in such a way, you're going to get great people who aren't going to want to leave. With that also being said, is if you're looking at things from a business perspective, this kind of leads into the personnel aspect, is seeing directly what they do and then being able to pan out and see how that affects the mission overall for whatever the clinic or health system. Because what I'm thinking of specifically is someone was identified by a specific medical group as a low-performing physician. This person was a primary care doc. The patients absolutely adored them. The reason that they were so-called low-performing was because they were spending lots of time with their patients. Going home at 8 or 9 o'clock at night, which lots to be said about that, maybe not the best way. But anyway, patients loved them. So they decided to, you know what, we're not going to encourage this person to stay. That person ended up leaving. Well, what they didn't realize is that this low-performing, quote-unquote performing physician was feeding all the specialists, was the number one refer to this doc, to this thing, all this other stuff. So, and they just because they were so myopic on just viewing the metrics rather than the mission overall, they created an environment where they lost this physician who created, this kind of these ripples effect throughout the community because they were so well loved, because no one saw beyond a simple metric number rather than taking that big scope, the big scope of the business look.
Well, and I'll tell you, we were talking, we started off this whole thing talking about time management, and just to kind of return to that for a second, I'll tell you that I think as leaders, it's important for us to take time and to make time to think strategically about these kinds of things. So if let's say, for example, you're one of the senior partners in your group, and you schedule yourself every day wall to wall with patients, and you never put any time in towards thinking about hiring and firing, how to improve, how to make process improvements, investing in your staff, setting meetings with your office leaders to figure out what the problems are that need to be solved, what support items you need, how staff morale is doing, things like that, then overall your business will suffer. And so your numbers may be great. And so people tell me this all the time. They're like, well, but my numbers are awesome. I was like, yeah, they're great, but how much greater could they be if you took just an extra few hours a week to focus on any of the 98 things in your office that I guarantee you that your staff is dying to tell you about right now. And so making time for those little things may seem like a net negative for a business, but it's actually a tremendous net positive because of, as we were saying, the ripple effects that tends to bring.
Yeah. And even, how we're bringing this back towards time management, the general efficiencies that you're speaking about, and also the general wellness that comes from getting rid of the toxicities or not bringing that kind of thing into your business practice, in essence, creates a sense of more efficient time management because you have the energy. You're not drained by the inefficiencies or the toxicities that are surrounding you. So it's that intangible again, that as much as it sounds like we're going off on a tangent, it really is in an effort to be have the best time management for yourself and those that are working around you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know so I'll give you an example. So in our practice, we have, we shut down the clinic an hour early on Friday afternoons for a staff meeting. And, not all the docs attend because, we just, you can't, we just can't be that far, removed from everybody working, but, all the office staff attend, and many of the docs do make serious efforts to attend. And I'll tell you what, ever since we started doing that, oh my gosh, the increase in the camaraderie, the communication's better. People are helping each other. It has cut down on email traffic. It's cut down on, people just cut down on confusion. There's all these, like you said, Melissa, a lot of intangibles, these little 5-second queries that people are like, oh, what should I do? And instead of them asking me, they're asking each other. Right. And not that I mind helping. I mean, I certainly do, but I mean, how great is it that they're all, looking for ways to support each other, and that frees me up to do other things that only I can do. And everybody's working in their strengths and trying to, shore up their weaknesses, and it just helps the whole business.
Yeah. And even that little thing of adding that kind of collaboration, that just without even the words being said, the act of doing that gives them a sense that this is supposed to be a team versus little silos that many times physicians run into.
It's very easy for us to silo ourselves. I mean, that's almost inevitable. It's the kind of thing that you have to pretty much actively fight against, because I think the system is really designed for that to be the case. I mean, and that can actually have some deleterious effects on physicians, where you either become truly isolated or start to believe in yourself as sort of this, supreme being of sorts, right? You're like, I'm the most important person in my world because I'm the only person in my world, yeah. Right? And then you forget how important the team is and how much we actually can and should rely on other people for support.
Yeah, agreed. Kevin?
I don't have any more to add to that. I mean, we covered the gamut here, yeah. from time management to practice management to mission versus metric centered practices. I think, but I think I'm going to circle it back here before we end. The critical piece to all of this, what you're really talking about, though, Brent, is that you have to be aware. You have to be aware enough to make a difference. You have to actually take the time to invest, to actually stop and notice and pay attention to things before it can actually make a difference, whether that's an individual schedule, whether it's your practice schedule, whether it's your business and growth of your of your clinic itself. So really appreciate that. And thank you for joining us on the show today. And Melissa, if you have any last words or final questions,
it's all you.
It's all me.
It's all you now.
All right. It's all me. Well, thank you everybody for joining us on the Change Physician podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro, with my wonderful co-host, Dr. Melissa Cady, and our fantastic returning guest, Dr. Brent Lacey, talking about time and practice management and priority management. And until next time, stay well.